If humans lived to be 500 years old, what hobbies would you get around to getting good at? Gardening would be very fun. It wouldn't be intimidating to start growing trees. Bonsai. I'm already good at nothing but 500 years and I can perfect it. What's the difference between being good at doing nothing and being perfect at doing nothing? Nothing. All I hear is someone saying, "John passed at the age of 110. And someone replying, "He was so young." This was kinda my train of thought. If we could live to be 500 years old, I'd imagine it'd be a much rarer feat than someone nowadays living to be 100, considering how easily damaged and accident-prone we are. For having big brains, we really are a fantastically flawed machine. Maybe if we lived that long we wouldn't always be in such a hurry. Maybe it would make us more careful. I don't know, to be honest, but dating would be really weird. Met this gal last weekend. She's 412 years old. Oh dude, that's just wrong. You're only 112, how can you be with a chick that's 300 years older than you? You know the rule, dude, half your age plus 50. Cool. I'm 30 years old. I should date 65 years old woman. I'm 15, still can't find any 57.5-year-old women yet, but oh well. Learning languages and just expanding general knowledge. Also seeing more of the world. Every 50 years we should all rotate one country to the left. We'd get really good at practicing safe sex for the sole sake of avoiding reproduction. As a matter of fact, there'd probably be a global restriction put in place only allowing people to reproduce once a century. A common trope in fantasy literature is that the longer a species lives or the more powerful it is, the somewhat proportionally lesser its fertility rate tends to be. So elves have children once every few centuries, whereas it could be considered a near miracle if a dragon manages to have more than one offspring throughout its life of many millennia. This is a real observable phenomenon. Just look at humanity now compared to 200 years ago. In most places it was common to have 6 or 8 children, as many would die either from diseases or physical injuries. But with the explosion of modern medicine, vaccines and significantly lower infant mortality rates, more people are living long enough to have their own offspring, and even the elderly are living longer. It did take people time to adapt. That's partly how the human population went from 1,5 billion to now almost 8 billion in only 200 years, despite it not growing nowhere near as much for millions of years. I guess the life extension would come with many other changes. For example, siblings would be a completely different experience. Family? Would that still be a thing at all? How long would it take you to become an independent adult? If everything stays the same, you just live longer. Can you imagine a family dinner? Hobbies? Cleaning the 6,000 square feet living room and takes a week. Who has time for hobbies? I'm pretty sure that if humans evolved to live that long, nature would take care of avoiding overpopulation. Something along the lines of long pregnancies, reaching sexual maturity at 200, women ovulating like once a decade, men only being capable of getting it up once a decade, or the uterus stops working after 5 kids, etc. This might be one of the few serious answers, but cooking. Even if some don't consider it a hobby, I would learn recipes from all around the world so when someone is in the mood for something I can make the best possible version of that thing. Living for 500 years would make grandma recipes meaningless. It would actually make you look completely different at grandparents, as they would still be youngsters. Imagine how many grandparents one would have. Any and every trade-based job, so therefore I don't have to spend a shit ton of money in order to maintain my home, vehicle, and just be able to rely on my own knowledge on being able to fix things, to be honest. If the past 2 months have taught me anything, nothing. If the past 2 months have taught me anything, I'll start a bunch and then abandon them. Though with 500 years maybe I'd pick a few back up. Do we physically age the same, or is it spread out over time? In order for humans to live 500 years, they would have to age slower, or else our immune system would be too weak to live that long. You're on the right track with age slower, but for people who live a really long time, it's typically not immune system weakening that kills them. Muscles, including the heart, weaken. Bones weaken. Other systems start breaking down. Cells mutate, and if nothing else, eventually one or more of them will turn cancerous and take you out that way. Almost all of these things comes back to our telomeres. Every time a cell replicates, there's a good chance little bit at the end of the DNA strands will break off, and eventually it gets to the point where critical portions of the DNA start failing to replicate properly, which causes those cells to start making imperfect copies of themselves, and is where many aging symptoms come from. The slower the telomere shortening rate, the longer a creature will live, relatively speaking. Not much would change, probably. If a 500-year lifespan was normal for humans like a 70-ish year lifespan is normal for us, then our lives would just be spread out longer. In a world like that, school would last for like 30 years, you work for centuries, etc. Wasn't Tolkien big on lifespan relativism? Like hobbits had their 20s and humans had their teens as their respective period of life, with much carefree frolicking and troublemaking before they matured. So I think you're right on it. If living so long was the norm, having a hobby for 100 years would be like someone now having a hobby for 10. The burden for becoming a master would elongate, probably. I wonder what would change based on the circumstance, if its humans have always lived about 500 years, versus this is the first generation of superhumans, who now will likely all live to be 500. Oh. Or, if every 500 years, a certain percentage of the population born were humans that would live to be 500, with the rest having normal lifespans. Edit. Personally, I think about the last option a lot, and I'd love that if it also came with elongated youth and physical well-being. I always feel behind the curve, but as though with a couple more lifetimes I could accomplish so much. I'd love enough time to sail the world drinking beer, then settle down and save a few species from extinction or grow a few jungles, you know? Although I definitely want there to be others, so that when I'm 300 there are also other people I know who are my age and life isn't just one huge repeating tragedy of watching everyone else die. By 100, virtuoso guitar. By 200, piano maestro. By 300, drums, baby. By 400, ace of base. By 500, harmonica blues master. Edit. Some futurists believe that the first person to live to the age of 150 is already alive right now, and the first person who will live to be 1,000 years old will be born by 2040. Interesting side note. These futurists sound like the ones in the 60s that thought we'd have cities on Mars by the 90s. The idea that we can go from the current record of 116 years, verified, to 1,000 by someone born in the next 20 years is insane. Lately I've been working on memorizing every country's name and location on the globe. If I had 500 years, I could try to memorize every city. Question. Does this affect our reproduction? If so, how, and if not, then overpopulation would be rampant, thus driving our push for interstellar travel and colonization of habitable planets. If the latter, I'd put forth an effort to study geology, engineering, physics and medicine. I'd be an explorer. I'd search whole planets and build a life for those looking to leave an overpopulated Earth. If the former, I'd invest my life in childcare and education so that I could help raise my kids, grandchildren and great-grandchildren, as well as to teach them so that they themselves can be a positive influence on the world and the people who they meet. I mean, if reproduction stays the exact same as right now, with most women not being able to give birth after 50, there might actually be a drop in childbirth, seeing as if you're living till you're 500, 50 would still be really young to you and you might not want a kid at that time. If I lived to 500, I'd have kids as early as possible. It makes more sense that way. You get all the benefits of generations of grandchildren, and still have more than enough time to live your life as you want it as your kids finish growing. Learn every language. like, even those endangered languages with 2 native speakers. God, I spend way too much time thinking about this topic. Cooking, music, architecture, medicine, teaching, writing. But most of all, conversing. Connecting with people through conversation is one of the most meaningful things a person can do, and I want to get better at it. There's not nearly enough time to cram all of this into a lifetime. What do you think of that? Leave a comment. And subscribe to this channel if you want to see more same videos.